So if we are almost ready, we've heard earlier this afternoon about early startups in life sciences and things with a passion that comes from the heart. People who, young entrepreneurs who start their own businesses and the joy and challenges of starting a business in healthcare. And now we just heard about artificial intelligence in healthcare and how to use, but not overestimate the power of data. And the next panel will be on investments. Again, I want to remind everybody in the audience that you can watch these recorded sessions on YouTube. You can watch them live, or you can watch them recorded later on. That you can also join the panelists and all the speakers on LinkedIn. And you are welcome to share these recordings or the presence of the summit on the social media. So Canice, is it almost ready? Are you ready to be introduced, or should we wait a little longer?
Yes. Yeah, I think we're ready. Yeah, I believe we have most of the panels. I'm going to do a roll call first, if you don't mind, but go ahead, please.
Okay. All right. So our next panel is on investments from ventures, angels, and it is going to be moderated by Canice Wu. Canice is head of insurance practice of Velocity, and he has a deep interest in digital transformation and venture building. He has established many businesses with vertical solutions using innovating technology, taking them from launching and executing to market plans. He also developed many incubator and accelerator programs for startups with innovative technologies. So you hear a lot from Canice about innovation and technology in healthcare. So I'm going to hand it off to him for his roundtable on investments. And thank you, Canice, and all the other panelists for being present.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Maybe the first thing I want to do is I just want to maybe do a roll call on my panel. So I see Daniel here. I also see Charles. I believe Orrin is here as well. Just do a quick check whether Peter Rosenthal, are you able to join us? No.
I'm here. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. Yeah. Perfect. Perfect. Okay, everybody's here. Thank you very much. So thank you again for the introduction, and we're very excited to have this panel about the investment side of the equation. So again, thank you for the kind introduction, and maybe just one more word about me, which is I'm also one of the venture partner here with F50, and I work with David Tsao from the very, very beginning of F50, and a lot of fond memories in the early days of F50, and I'm very excited to be here to help on this event as well. So without further ado, I just want to maybe just take a few minutes for each of the panelists to introduce themselves. I'm just going to go through alphabetically, no, not in particular order, alphabetically. So maybe Charles, can you maybe start?
Certainly, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. My name's Charlie Sidman. I am simultaneously an angel, a VC, a crowdfunder, a public market person, and my focus is young and growing companies, whichever their financing mechanism. I'm speaking to you from the East Coast in Bar Harbor, Maine. But I work globally.
Thank you. Thank you, Charles. Daniel, I know you introduced yourself a few times, but maybe there'll be some new audience. So Daniel, you want to introduce yourself? Can't hear you, Daniel.
Thank you, Canice. I feel a little bit like a broken record, but yes, I'll introduce myself. My name is Daniel Teo. I'm a managing partner at Honeywell Ventures. We are a Palo Alto-based VC firm that invests exclusively in medical devices. And within that space, our focus, our specialty is in the area of surgical innovations. These are devices and instruments that help our surgeons see, treat, and heal our patients better. C will be all of the visualization, navigation technologies, including some novel point-of-care diagnostics. Heal would be, treat will be all of the treatment modalities, RF, microwave, laser, ultrasound, and as well as home and portable dialysis. And then heal would be all of the tissue closure, wound closure, tissue healing, tissue regeneration kind of technologies. Those are our special areas of interest, but we can also invest outside of that if there is really an interesting opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Next, Orrin.
Canice, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate being invited. I'm the CEO and managing partner at the Global Health Impact Fund. We invest exclusively in our first fund in digital health, telehealth, and medical device. And we have a really great portfolio already. I'm also a doctor. I've had 25 years of clinical practice, and I've trained in anesthesia, and I practice in San Francisco.
Great. Thank you for the introduction. And finally, Peter.
So I'm a 25-year member of two angel groups in the Bay Area, originally Angels Forum and now Mighty Capital. We invest in about 1/3 life science medical, 1/3 enterprise software, and 1/3 consumer products. A unique aspect of our fund is we have a very close relationship with an organization called Products That Count, which consists of 300,000 product managers and senior level product people, which is a resource for our companies to both recruit, sell products, and get advice.
Great. Thank you for the introduction. I think the format is that I was basically lead with a series of questions, and I think we'll tee up for the panelists, and of the panelists, feel free to just chime in for some of the questions as well. And also, I think the audience, if you have also questions, I think we're going to take them also toward the end of the session as well. So get them ready, and we got a wealth of experience in in medicine, in investments, and tons of experience here. So let's learn from the experts here. Let's start with the first question here. So the pandemic and COVID have obviously had major impact to the world, but also very significant impact to the startup and the venture capital community. What proactive strategies you as an investor have instituted in your portfolio companies, right? Maybe related to financials, maybe related to operations. Love to hear your thoughts and maybe some of the advice as well for the audience. So love to have the panelists to just go ahead, please.
I'll start off if you want. So early on in the COVID situation, we realized that there was potentially going to be a serious cash crunch for our companies, and we worked with each of the portfolio companies to really take a look at how many months of cash they had. We sort of felt that anything short of 2 years was going to be a potential problem. And so we encouraged them to downsize where appropriate or to scale back. And also all of our companies got help early on in applying for PPP funding for the company.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I mean, the issue really is one of risk management at this point. And I echo what Peter said is the first thing you have to do is look at the burn rate, look at the amount of money they have in the bank and what their runway is, and make sure that they can extend that as far as possible, with the idea that it's very probable that there won't be a lot of capital coming in the near future due to the market shocks. I think the other thing to recognize is that many companies have had problems because they're not currently able to do clinical trials or work with hospitals. And so that's really frozen a lot of the operations in place. Where, you can't get through the IRB, you can't deploy a new product. And so you really have to plan around that and creating more time in terms of not just capital runway, but in terms of deployment runway.
In terms of clinical trials, I think I want to pick up on that point. Yeah, it certainly has been affected, but one of the ways in which we try and mitigate that is to have contingency plans. Try and develop alternative sites, because you don't know when and where they're going to open up. Every jurisdiction is a little bit different, especially if you're doing an international trial. Every jurisdiction has its own timing. So it pays to have some contingency plans, alternative plans, so that whichever jurisdiction opens up first, you're ready to go. As far as cash is concerned, that's certainly a problem, and the prudent thing to do is to conserve cash. But one of the things we realized was that, again, this depends on jurisdictions, but many of the companies that we work with actually have got exemptions. They were granted exemptions as a essential service. And so that allowed them to continue to do their work, even though clinical trials are not ongoing, but at least the engineering and mechanical work can be done in the labs.
Charles, you have something to add to that as well? So a lot of good insights so far.
I think the others have covered anything I would add. I'll chime in on some of the others.
Okay, you bet. I think on the operations, do you see certain, because of the environment, are there certain areas of operations that you think might be easing because of the urgency of the situation? Yeah.
I would take that question. Sorry, go ahead, Charles.
Well, in terms of easing because of the COVID climate, in some ways there are funding sources available now, investors and government programs that are responding more rapidly and administratively almost. Some applications are not going through the standard review process. So for some companies, particularly in the healthcare area, I think it's, to rephrase Charles Dickens, it's not the best of times and the worst of times, but the worst of times may be the best of times.
I want to echo what Charles said. In fact, we at Honeywell had just recently compiled a list of grants that are specially designed to fund COVID research and development, COVID-related research and development. And believe it or not, there's still about $7 billion of grant money that's out there that's still available. So if you happen to be working in a COVID-related product or area, that's certainly something that you should access. And in fact, we've made that list available on our website. Anyone can access it and search it and find one that's suitable for you. So hopefully that will be of some help to you.
I'd like to add something to what Daniel said.
Go ahead.
There are enormous resources now, but there's also a downside, a danger of that. Given that there's such interest and need, I'm seeing an uptick in the amount of bad science, nonsense science being proposed, because you can say COVID now, and it's like AI was a year ago. It's magic. So if you say that word, everybody thinks that it will fly. Well, a lot of them don't. So special care and attention is warranted.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that I have an AI blockchain COVID solution if anybody wants to invest. No, but seriously, this is an interesting point that you bring up, because one of the themes of our fund is that it's clinician founded and clinician driven. And what's critical is to include the clinicians and the scientists from the beginning all the way through execution in the decision-making process of a company. The insight that community can bring will hopefully filter out the bad science, so that really only the better companies get through the processes in order to ultimately commercialize. But this has been an opportunity. Crisis creates opportunity, and I think that operationally there have been a lot of problems, but at the same time we've seen in our portfolio a number of opportunities that have arisen because of solutions that our companies had that would help things in this current environment. So there is a lot of money that can be invested. There is capital that's on the sidelines. And if you can point it in the right direction to deploy it, this is a terrific investing opportunity. It's changed, the culture around telemedicine, for example, has completely changed, whether it's through reimbursement, through adoption of patients, through adoption of doctors. Getting good solutions that are telemedicine-based solutions, that's a phenomenal opportunity right now.
May I add another comment to follow that? Just another caution. I'm all on board with you in terms of having the doctors and the clinicians involved from the beginning, but there's a danger in only having the health professionals and the technology people governing something and pushing something, because we have to remember that all of these solutions have to go out and be accepted by the real world, who are not healthcare professionals and technicians. And often we say, and some of the previous talks today emphasize this. We think it's a great solution if the world would only do things our way.
That's true. I agree with that, but just to say, I didn't say doctors should have the table, but just a seat at the table.
Right.
So actually on that topic, I'd love to maybe follow up with a question about maybe directly related to COVID or maybe beyond just during this environment, you know, have your areas of interest, right, shifted or have been impacted because of COVID and the environment? Are there certain technologies or innovation that you're looking at? You talked about telemedicine and telehealth. That's a big hot word these days, but are there other areas that you see are popping up that you think actually really have some good promise? I don't think I stunned everyone here, right? So come on.
Well, I'll venture to say something. I think the obvious ones, of course, telehealth and remote monitoring and respiratory health. Those are clearly areas that are very relevant now. But we are a little bit. We look at it very carefully. One of the problems with telehealth and remote health is payers are generally wary of funding that. Pre-COVID, there are very few CPT codes that are available for telehealth and remote monitoring. With COVID, yes, a few more opened up, but the indications we are getting from conversations with them is that the intent is to review. All of these are temporary measures, and once COVID is over, they are likely to be rolled back. So we need to kind of understand exactly what is going to survive and what isn't in order to make a better assessment there. But beyond that, beyond the obvious, we see opportunities in several areas. I won't call them opportunities because that sounds bad. But number one, renal health. We know for a fact that about 10–15% of COVID patients also present acute kidney injuries as a comorbidity. The percentage for COVID patients in ICU with kidney health or renal health injuries is even higher, 20–40%. That means not only are kidney transplants going to be less available going forward, the need for more dialysis is going to be even greater for the next decade because of all of the 2 million people so far in the US have had COVID, and that's going to have some kind of impact on them. Beyond that, we also see that similarly in gastrointestinal GNI space, 18–23% of COVID patients show some form of COVID malfunction. Show some form of gastrointestinal malfunction. And therefore, we believe that non-invasive, preferably point-of-care diagnostic technologies and treatment modalities for GNI diseases and conditions will be more badly needed than ever before. And then finally, COVID also damages soft tissues significantly, leading to secondary complications. And so we believe that high-precision, energy-based surgical instruments, innovative wound closure and tissue healing solutions will also be in high demand. So those are the three immediate trends that we're seeing that are not immediately obvious. But if you look a little bit at the surface, this is what we're seeing.
I would throw a comment on that as well, Daniel. You speak of GI or diabetes or other areas interacting with COVID. COVID is really just the canary in the coal mine, and it's revealing the problems which have pre-existed, and it's exacerbated and exacerbating these previous problems. So the problems of poor lifestyle or poverty or malnutrition or other disease states, those are really the fundamental things. And 10 million people a year die of TB, but we're not talking about them now. We're talking about the few 100,000 who are dying of COVID. Yes, the people who have TB are going to interact and be more seriously affected by COVID, but really this is the tail that's wagging the dog. Let's recognize what the dog really is. It's not COVID, it's these other things.
Peter, Orrin, any comments before we move on?
I'll pass.
You'll pass. I'll add to it, vaccinations and pharmacology and supply chain, solutions. These are all areas that I think are going to get renewed interest. But I think what I would mostly add is that I think there's been a reawakening of the awareness of the importance of innovation in healthcare, whether it's in terms of healthcare delivery, whether it's in terms of the disparities and the social determinants of healthcare, or whether it's in terms of just creating new things, whether it's antibiotics or antivirals or what have you, that these are things we need to do. And if we wait until there is a pressing need, it's already too late. And so we have to innovate, we have to create new strategies for getting innovation out of the lab and into commercialization, new incentives all across the board. I think that's very exciting.
Yeah, that was actually the question I was gonna, can you hear? Yeah, that was the question I was gonna follow up on, which is, you know, there's the diseases and the conditions, but yeah, you would talk about, are there other related innovation or ways to kind of help distribution, supply chain, or access? There's a lot of areas that needs to, I guess, needs to advance and be able to address some of the people with all these conditions around the world on a, you know, on a global basis all at the same time.
Well, one issue is, I suspect most of you over the last few years have seen one or more companies looking for funding for vaccine or vaccine delivery systems of one sort or another. We certainly have, and we've always passed on them because the economics of reimbursement for that, both here in Western countries and in developing countries, the reimbursement has always been a challenge. Now, all of a sudden, these companies in the vaccine field and vaccine delivery are getting a lot more attention. I think we'll be seeing more down the road. Whether that's a long-term trend and how to solve the financial reimbursement part of that, I think remains a problem long-term.
I mean, I think you're getting a real-world example of managing disease states early versus letting them come to fruition and managing the consequences, and not just in terms of the social impact of people getting sick and people dying, but of the economic impact. And you know, if we look at some of the countries in parallel who've been dealing with the COVID crisis and who are much more aggressive in the beginning and who haven't had the impact to their economies and to their healthcare infrastructure, you know, you can see that preventative care is very effective and ultimately saves money. The question is, can we translate that new knowledge into preventative care in this country? And that remains to be seen.
Great, thank you. I'm going to switch gear a little bit, and since we're talking about investors, right? So, you know, given this shifting gear to kind of shelter-in-place topic here, right? You know, how has shelter-in-place, being forced to work remotely, really impacted in terms of how you've engaged with the startups, or possibly how has other companies been pitching remotely? And how have you made determination what to invest in a remote setting without having the face-to-face type of interaction? Love to get your thoughts on that.
I'll chime in. I have never been as busy. There are times today, twice today, I've had 3 or 4 competing obligations, and I couldn't obviously. I've had 2 screens open at once, and my sound turned off and trying to listen to both. But I have never been as busy. We don't spend time on airplanes and airports. It's amazing.
I can identify with Charles there. I think we can certainly do a lot of work that's online, by email, by Zoom, like this, phone calls, and in some ways we're more productive than ever before. But on the other hand, you know, in terms of making an investment, there are a couple of things that you can't do without. Usability, for instance, is very important to us, and so the ability to be able to touch and feel and see how this instrument actually works. You know, if it's small enough, they can have it shipped to you. You can look at it at your home office. But if it's connected to some of the machinery and you can't do this at home, but you need to look and see how it works in animal labs, for instance, or clinical trials. We talked about clinical trials earlier. That's definitely affected. You know, we have offered, and then the next point, of course, is investing is not just about the technology, it's also about assessment of the team. Is this a team that can actually take it through? And you can build understanding and get all of the data through Zoom and electronic means, but you'll still need to look the founder in the eye. You still need to be able to assess for yourself from his body language, from the conversations, the side conversations they're having within the team, if this is a team that is going to be able to handle the $1 million or $2 million or whatever amount of money you're going to put in their hands, whether they're going to take good care of it. That is difficult to do online. Now we've offered, so what we've done is we've offered term sheets, for instance, to companies that we've previously met and are now kind of going through the process. But you know, to invest in a company that we haven't met entirely, that's going to be very difficult.
Yeah, I just add a quick thought because I agree with everything. I've probably been more productive in this period of time, but I think that the biggest loss is the loss of the conferences and the meeting of people in person and the networking and, you know, getting the key opinion leaders together with the companies. I think that's been very hard for the companies and very hard for investors.
Yeah, I've heard investors where they literally like have 100 interested entrepreneurs asking for funding, and it's really hard to wade through that, particularly if you have not met them before and you don't know them ahead of time, right? So, you know, how the heck do you assess that? And then, as you mentioned, Daniel, the face-to-face is so important to build that level of relationship, that level of connections with the entrepreneur and the investor, and it's very challenging doing it remotely on, you know, on the Zoom, no matter how you look at the person via remotely, right? So,
Can I chime in?
Great. So
body language is really important. The interaction is important, and it's fun to share coffee or wine together. But equally important for me is the give and take and the challenge and the response. And a lot of that can happen remotely. After several cycles of interaction, to questions, to challenges, to uncertainties, you can learn a lot quite quickly about someone you haven't actually physically met.
Or the old line, you learn a lot about a person when you play golf with them, right? So, yeah, you can play golf, but it's hard if they're not there, right? So
I can't play golf, so what do I do?
Yeah, play pickleball. No, just kidding. So, different question. So, I'm sure you all heard that a lot of investors like to invest in founders and startups that are within driving distance from their home or something like that, right? So that's a kind of a joke, but have, you know, given that all this working remotely, and you know, and I mentor a lot of startups, and some are literally from down the street from where I live to Taipei to, you know, to Germany, right? And so virtual connection all of a sudden expanded very globally, but have you, you know, has this virtual connection globally affected in terms of the types of companies, or maybe the geography of the companies, and how you connect with entrepreneurs in terms of those type of relationships? Do you invest outside the area? Like, do you invest in international startups now?
I do and always have, and so this is not such a big change for me.
Yeah, likewise.
Okay. Daniel? Yeah.
Nothing has changed in terms of our geographic coverage, but again, the practical reality is that now you can't, you know, there are many places that you can't travel to at the moment. And so that's a practical reality at the moment.
Right. We only got a few more minutes. Maybe I'll just see whether are there any questions from the audience. If not, I can wrap up with one more question, but I'd love to maybe get audience all questions from the audience. All right, so we'll give it a few more seconds. All right, so why don't I just wrap up with one more question, and there are questions posted in chat or whatever. So given all this conversations, right, in terms of, do you have any advice for entrepreneurs just in general given this time? And also, do you have any advice for fellow investors during this time, right? So I'd love to turn the table around a little bit in terms of how would you think about, you know, advice on both sides of the table? And we'll go down the chain. Go ahead.
So I think one thing that anybody looking for money now needs to think about and include in their presentation is an acknowledgement of the COVID situation and the limitations it's placed on doing business, and they need to talk about how they're going to deal with that, or how they have dealt with it in their business plan financing needs. If they ignore it or pretend it doesn't exist, I think that's a bad leg to get started on.
What I would say to startups is that COVID is of course a lot of bad things, but it doesn't have to be all bad, and that there are actually opportunities also to be found there. New areas that are now becoming more important, but also what's the saying that the cream always rises to the top, and I think in this environment it is all the more vitally important that it's going to be the top 10, 15, 25% of the companies that are going to do well and do better than ever before, pre-COVID. And if you are in that top 15, 25%, then you're good. So, tighten up your procedures, be disciplined, be very, now you have a lot more time to think instead of act. So think more and think through your plans, make them robust so that you'll come out of this process a lot stronger and better before.
Charles? Yeah.
Okay, well, I believe, as several people have said, that problems, times of stress, create opportunity, and the cream will rise. When I talk to entrepreneurs, when I talk to investors, I tell them to pay attention to what I'm going to say now for entrepreneurs. Make sure you consult with and show me interactions. Before you talk to me, show me interactions with, one, investors. So you've done your homework, you know what might fly or not. And secondly, tell me your interactions and support from the market, either the actual or the potential customer, because your idea of what the market needs is not as powerful as what the market says it's ready to buy.
Great one. Orrin, last but not the least.
Last but not least, I would agree with all of that. It comes down to, if you have a disciplined process for evaluating companies, that process, you shouldn't throw it out. You should use it. You shouldn't cut corners in it where maybe we would in a hotter market, frothier market. If it's a good business doing something well that other people can't do, with a team that is the right team to do it, and there's a market for the product, it should do well. And, it just may need more time, more capital, but, the fundamentals still work. So I think, stick to your discipline and you should be okay.
Great. Thank you very much. Again, I just want to thank all the panelists for your great insights and also your time. So thank you very much. And I think onwards to I guess the next panel. I guess.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great time.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Hey, Canice, that's a great panel.
Thank you, David. Nice to see you.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Catch up face to face soon.
Yeah.
Thank you, Canice.
Hey, Randy. It's been a while. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you.
I have all new terminals in front of me, and I have a couple of them. I want to make sure. Can you see me and everything's fine, and you hear me? So we're all good.
Yep, all good.
Randy, I can hear you well.
It sounds like David.
It is, David. Come on.
Hey, great job. Great job.